ma ütlen alguses eesti keeles, et tänane vestlus on siis ainuke vestlus, mis meil on inglise keeles. Nii et edasi siit ma lähen inglise keeles, ma tutvustan lühidalt seda formaati ja näitust ja et kõik välismaailmast saaksid ka aru. I just explained that I'm going to speak now in English.
I understood.
Because that's the only talk we have in this series which is going to be in English. My name is Sten Ojavee, I'm the curator of this exhibition. I'm briefly going to speak about the idea of Artishoki biennaal and what's going to happen tonight. Artishoki biennaal is an experimental art exhibition where in this case 8 different artists produce new work depending on the concept of show, and 9 different authors write about every artwork. Every day we present one new artwork together with 9 different texts. That's the last, not the last, but the last artwork we are exhibiting and putting out. It's work by Ragne Kikas. And every day we are talking about, not specifically about the artist and the practice of this specific artist, but some topics coming out from this work in general. We have started from the belonging and ethnic minorities and national identity to ethnic minorities. We have talked about subcultures, we have talked about traditions, we have talked about philosophical perspective on nationalism and belonging. And now as we present Ragne's work, I think we go more about high fashion and how high fashion maybe is connected to nationalism. Is there any connections? And yeah, let's see where this discussion goes. Yeah, not to confuse anyone, today is not actually the last day. There is the last artwork presented tomorrow. The exhibition is still open until, let's say, 4 o'clock something. Then we start to deinstall the works slowly, because for the fashion demonstration at the end, it starts at 6:30. And before that, we still present the Artishok catalog at 6 o'clock. And now I would like to introduce today's panelists. I introduce myself. I'm the curator of the exhibition. I also take part. Annamari Vänskäga, a professor from Aalto University Fashion Studies, also visiting professor at the Shanghai International College of Fashion and Innovation. And Annamari has published and taught on art, fashion and visual culture at the intersection of gender and sexuality. And she's also one of the authors of Artishoki biennaal. Karin Kivirähk, my colleague, also someone who I actually wish to be part of the, wished before the exhibition to be one of the writers, but as Karin is, because Karin is one of the few fashion critics, I would say, who are writing quite actively today. But as she's also my colleague, and yeah, we thought we can't do it like that together. So yes, I will also sit down now.
There are still some chairs here.
Yes, please come sit down. There's plenty of chairs still there, because maybe you can't hear that well from the back rows. So maybe I will open up this panel. We do it rather like loosely. We, I think, ask questions from each other and share comments and ideas about the exhibition, about Ragne's work, and about maybe identity, national belonging from, because it's interesting, I think. Annamari is from Finland, and she's writing about an exhibition which deals with Estonian national identity. So it's interesting maybe to hear from Annamari, how did you find it? Was it difficult to actually think about fashion, national identity, Estonian national identity, to even fashion, coming from maybe Finnish perspective?
Well, certainly. If I think about just fashion and national identity or nations in general, I think it's there's a really big contradiction there, because fashion is always conceptualized as something that sort of is not tied to any specific national identity at all, rather the opposite of it is. So it's a kind of conceptualized as this global cosmopolitan phenomenon from the beginning, and it's something that is not interested in the national identity per se. And some researchers have even kind of made some contradictions or juxtaposed national identity and fashion and kind of argued, Ted Paul Hemos, for example, writes about kind of fashion being something that is in a totally different sphere than national garments, national costumes. So there's a kind of from the beginning there's a kind of a juxtaposition there. So in a way it's kind of the beginning is kind of, to start this kind of discussion is ambiguous from the perspective of fashion. And the reason for that is, of course, that national identities are quite often considered as something constant, something unchanging, something that is there, doesn't really, you have it or you don't have it, but it doesn't really change, it is there. Whereas fashion is, of course, conceptualized as something that changes all the time. So it's just something that don't really conceptually necessarily go together. But of course then at the same time, indeed fashion, this is one perspective, but at the same time, if we think about the history of fashion, you can detect the concept of national identity there. We say that fashion started in Paris in 1858. That's a very specific year that has been given to the birth of fashion in the modern sense. But there is also a contradiction there, because it's also something that, well, fashion somehow started in Paris, yes, the modern notion of fashion. Obviously we had fashions before that as well, but they were a little bit different, systematically speaking. But the one who has been said to be the one who kind of established the idea of fashion was an Englishman. So there's a kind of a Charles Frederick Worth, this English couturier who moved to Paris and opened his the first haute couture fashion house. Thanks. It's a cold day today. So in a way, it's very intriguing. Maybe I just sum up and say that it's a very intriguing exhibition to start thinking about these issues. And if I look at the pieces, I don't necessarily think they are about Estonianness at all. And I didn't really think about them in that way when I wrote these couple of texts.
Yeah, that's something I think an interesting point, because we have had many discussions here before, and what we have actually found out that what I think many of the works you see exhibited here, they comment on the ideas of national belonging, and what it comes out for me quite clearly that it is rather like international and quite universal notions of nationalism. They don't specifically have to be only Estonian national like kind of identity markers, but we can see like a lot of national symbols here which happen in not every, but most of the European nation buildings, what also started at the same time what you mentioned when the fashion started. Actually, it's interesting, but it also meets the 19th century is the time where the modern nation starts to, so we can actually see some kind of parallels there, because I think the core notion of both the national identity but also fashion identity is being an individual and unique, one in the individual level, one in the nation's level maybe, but it's, different perspective, but there is some similarities, I would say.
I would just add that if I remember correctly, then there is like not in curatorial text, and in the press release there is nowhere actually said that this exhibition should be about Estonian national identity. I think it's everywhere just like national identity, But it's interesting that also in these talks that they've had, but also in the works of the artists, you can see that actually a lot of artists have taken the like Estonian national identity as their starting point. Like Laivi herself described like nature as core of Estonian identity. You can see Estonian identity in Tartu Ojavee works and so on. Like ending with the Kris Lemsalu's Prisma dresses.
Very Finnish.
Very Finnish, which are Finnish, and also I think like in this Finnish and Estonian national identity, or like how they want to see themselves, there are a lot of similarities. We are both those like nature-loving nations and Prisma-loving nations. So.
Yes, but at the same time, I think that are right. For example, Laivi's work, which you mentioned, which is over there, if you have seen it, it's sort of very interesting pieces of sort of prototype garments, bringing together some natural elements such as sand or grass, and then very man-made other types of materials. But just looking at these materials, of course, then you can just think that they are from nature, but she's kind of making a point about them being from a specific geographical location. But still, I don't think that kind of constitutes any kind of national identity. It's more like a commentary on its impossibility, I would say. And just in the fashion context, I would say that it is completely kind of taken away from the national identity discourse altogether. It's rather a commentary on the wastefulness of fashion, or that's how I kind of interpret it. But it's an interesting piece that we see there, which kind of brings together different kinds of discourses, and about her idea of Estonian as being something that is tied to earth or forest, or I don't know. I think that there are so many nations, such as we Finns, who also kind of think that we are forest people. So it's again something that goes beyond the boundaries of a specific people or nation.
Yeah, that's exactly. I think it's a very interesting point about also Estonians being like people from the forest. Because nowadays I think most of Estonians consider this as with pride. It's something we are proud of. But actually, during the second half of 19th century, the Baltic Germans who were in Estonia, they thought Estonians are like actually people from the forest, meaning that it's actually they're stupid and they don't have education. So this has also changed the meaning in that sense. So we actually now celebrate something which was not intentionally that good back in the times. But
I have a comment on this. Actually, this forest myth is a construction. The Estonians were never like forest people. They were afraid of forest and more peasants like living in their houses and between the fields, but not in the forest. And also, for example, one like example of this is that the Estonian language has really few words about of mushrooms, like because actually people didn't go that much to the forest as we would like to think, and were not like picking berries and mushrooms all the time, and so it's like also a real like myth actually that the forest they were like living in the forest.
I think maybe before we continue like going that detail, maybe I know that Karin, you have some questions about like, because Annamari is actually the only fashion like researcher we have in this exhibition. Like other people we have are like philosophers, anthropologists, folklorists, experimental writers, artists. So I think I know that Karin has some like questions about maybe your profession as well.
Right.
Yes. So I also wanted to say that Annamari is not a special guest, not only because she's a writer for Artishok Va and not only because she's from Aalto University. That seems to be like a dream place for all Estonian fashion students. But also like someone who we can call fashion researcher or fashion theorist, and she teaches students fashion theory. And I actually wanted to ask, like, what does it mean actually to teach fashion theory? How does it differ from teaching visual culture or art? And why is it important for fashion students also to study like fashion theory, not only like practice? Because in Estonia, I think fashion students don't get that much of fashion theory. They mostly get like practice and also common subjects together with other art students.
Right. That's a really good question, and I think it's very important nowadays for anybody to kind of be aware of, all artists and design students, to be aware of the professional roots and the kind of the context in which they work. So studying fashion has been, I think here and also in Finland and elsewhere, has been very kind of a craft-based profession and study module. So majority of the studies is obviously about learning how to be a very skillful maker of clothes. But at the same time, I think, and especially in Art University, I think that there is a desire to also then kind of be able to develop people's way of thinking and thinking, because it is obviously something that affects the way in which you work. So becoming aware of the ways in which you think, why you see something as interesting, or why you design in a certain way. It's very good to become aware of that, and this is where theoretical studies and fashion theory has a very important place, I think. So it's kind of building the context around your craft work, conceptualizing what you do, why you do it, what's your aim. It's not something that is necessarily a given when you start doing. You just do, as artists do. They just do, and maybe do not theorize so much what they do. But at the same time, of course, I think that they are very kind of conceptual and theoretical, and they have specific ideas why they do this. They do know it, but just to help them to make that, verbalize it in some ways. I think it's very important. And in art education, it has been done for a longer time than in fashion. Yeah, so that's why I think I was hired for the Art University.
And do you see students interested in that, or is it best, just a subject we have to go through?
Well, it depends, of course, on the teacher, I would say, how they manage to approach the students and make them interested. So it could be both of them, but I find my students have been really saying to me that it's great they can have this kind of theoretical class. And I'm not saying that it's purely theoretical. I mean, it's kind of talking about theory in a very practical way, depending on the level of the studies, obviously. So I teach on the MA level and on the PhD level. So there are differences of tone, obviously. So we might start with an object, which could be a piece of garment, photograph, or whatever, and then we start talking about it, and maybe we have read some texts beforehand, and then we just try to figure out the meanings and the larger contexts around those objects and visual representations, for example. So students do like it, I think, yes, and I think that they have a craving for that, because they, especially at the MA level, they already know quite a lot how to produce, how to make, so they are very, very skillful at that. But then they also have the kind of feeling that they would like to know more, so they do enjoy it, yes.
Yeah, that's, I think, a very interesting and important part of fashion education, definitely.
Yeah. It's becoming more and more important, I think, now that we are facing these challenges of climate change and everything. So we need to know more.
Because I remember Laili, one of the artists in Artishok as well, she used to do her BA and MA in Aalto University as well, and I remember she was constantly telling me that what a relief it is to get also theory what maybe was lacking in Estonian Academy of Arts, you know. So I hope our department maybe also develops towards that. But it's interesting because you're visiting professor at Shanghai. Maybe you can comment on that as well. How is that difference, or is there a difference, or what do you teach there?
Oh, it's totally different. Totally different, I would say. On many levels. First of all, the language barrier is quite high, so just to get over that is a challenge. And then, you know, just the educational or the whole cultural difference is also a big issue in between China and Finland. So the students are very different in their attitudes. I mean, our students in Finland, and I suppose here as well, are kind of really independent, and they know what they want to do, and they want to be kind of individual. But in China, I've noticed that it's not so easy for students to express their own individuality and of their own kind of ideas. So they are much more dependent on the feedback of the teacher and the professors, and they need to be instructed in much more detailed way. For example, our students, so they are, I don't know, afraid of making mistakes, which is kind of a silly idea, thinking that we are in an art institution. So it's very different, but it's very, very interesting, and I've been very lucky to be in Shanghai because it's a very lively and vibrant fashion scene there as well, and they are quite conceptual, so it's a really interesting place to be, and I don't think that so many Westerners even know about the Chinese fashion scene, what it is, what kind of talents there are. So yeah, it's very nice.
You already mentioned that, like Finnish students maybe being individuals, and as in China being more dependent on the teachers. And how do you see fashion? Should it be very individual? Because it started as a very individual phenomenon. Is it still nowadays? Do you see?
Well, there are different levels, of course, depending on what level you're talking about. So if you talk about high fashion, kind of the artistic department of fashion, then obviously you need to be very individual and conceptual and kind of push for new ideas and new ways of thinking and constructing. So yes, there. And I think that art university is kind of geared towards that. So our students are really artistic, and they do really individual work in that sense. But of course, the majority of fashion, which I don't even know whether it should be called fashion or something else, happens on the kind of a daily, mass-produced clothing scene, so to say. And there are the most problems that we face today in fashion are on that level. So I don't know if we should even be talking about fashion there. Should it be just mass-produced garments or clothes or whatever? Yeah. So individuality depends on what you talk about, but of course it's kind of this ideal that when you are also consuming fashion and wearing clothes, you think that you're expressing your individual selfhood, and it's a very important part of the idea of fashion, obviously. But at the same time, of course, the other side of it is group belonging. So you belong to a group through your comments at the same time as you are expressing your individuality in some ways. So there's that. So in a way, we are sold this idea of individuality, but of course at the same time we are part of, I don't know, a larger group.
Also, if you said that high fashion is individual, then the outcome has one name on it usually, but actually we know that in those high fashion designer houses, a lot of designers are actually working on this thing. Today's artist working for Yoji Yamamoto, and she has her own mind there, but I guess she's like she doesn't want to come forward. But actually, like there are a lot of other designers working there who maybe don't have like their own name on something. Yeah, so it's also in a way actually like a group creation.
Of course. Yes, fashion is very much about. Of course, fashion is very much about doing a group effort. So the designer's part is only one part in the whole process. But of course, that has always been the case in art as well. So the kind of Rembrandts that we know are not made by Rembrandt. Maybe a hand has been made by him, and the rest by somebody else. And then there is a signature, of course. So it's kind of a similar logic there as well.
If we already spoke briefly about Ragnar now, I think it's interesting to think about, because when I curated this exhibition, I made some specific order in which order I came to put out some specific works. And I had quite certain idea that I would like to end up with the Taina Moravska, who was yesterday, with a work which talks about this kind of globalized, very generic and kind of non-unique, this white work with the red plastic around it, which speaks about not belonging to anywhere but belonging to everywhere, basically this globalized, anonymous kind of identity. Is this something, I thought it's a nice way to end this exhibition, which deals about national belonging. That is there a possibility actually to produce clothing that doesn't have any indications or identity markers. But then for some reasons Tanya was yesterday, not today. Because I think Tanya was really asking this question. I think this red sign around this figure also is critically asking this question, but without already knowing that this question is going to be failed, because it's not possible, I thought. And I think you can't produce something which doesn't have any characteristics or identity, because at the very moment you produce it, it becomes something. It's like a philosophical question, but I think then when I today installed Ragnar's work, it was quite interesting to see that if this is actually a work that Tanya wanted to comment and ask questions, and actually Ragnar produced something, high fashion items that doesn't have specific national or kind of identity markers that we can, put it in one box or something, that it belongs there, this is from there, and stuff like that. So I just want to ask what your ideas are about that.
I think this is a really nice pair, and they kind of follow really nicely from one to another. And the Tanya Murakowska's work, in which we see jeans and t-shirts and kind of hoodies and sneakers, it's kind of this global uniform, I guess, nowadays. And necessarily, when you see something like that, you don't necessarily pin it to any specific nationality. We were talked earlier that maybe you still do think about it as a very Western set of garments or an outfit, and that's certainly it. But still, you could see that anywhere in the world, I would imagine. But looking closer at the garments, for example, the sneakers, I think they are from certain brands. So you could kind of think about, all right, these fashionable people, man and woman, I think so they're gendered signifiers at least at play, which of course obviously tied to identity. So these nomadic people, they are very white as well, but they still belong to a sort of some sort of a fashion tribe of its own. So in a way, it's the idea of a tribe or nation becomes very different in that work. So she's kind of commenting on the idea of being part of a tribe, I guess. Not necessarily a nation, but a tribe. Whereas Ragnar Kikas's work, yes, I think it's more far removed from any notions of national identity and nationalism. And I think that one of the keys there is that she doesn't use ready-made garments, whereas these are something that they are mass-produced, and we could say that, well, they are from H&M or something like that. I don't know if they are, but they could be. So we can kind of say that they are Western mass-produced, maybe made in China or something type of setting. And then, whereas her work is obviously unique, and pieces of art in that sense. So more far removed from the ideas of nationalism or national identities. There's the whiteness, of course, which in that case indicates upper class, I think at least. White clothes are kind of historically considered something that belong to the upper classes because they get dirty so quickly. So in order to be able to keep it as white as they are now, you need to either buy new clothes all the time or then wash them regularly. And they don't look like washed to me, they look like brand new. So I suppose you could talk about wealth and class and things like that. And then the mannequin dolls have been chosen to be white, so I guess that also is a commentary on whiteness. I don't know, so yeah, so kind of commenting on some aspects of identity and also national identity, racial issues. Yeah, very interesting and intriguing work, but I'm kind of uncertain what that red hovering shadow, I don't know if that's a shadow. What is it? I'm not sure what it is, how to read it.
I can't give you like certain answer because I didn't produce it, but for me it represents this failure of this question at the first place. This kind of red. Yeah, I think it because also of course the whiteness of as you mentioned, I think they all are made to fail. Basically, you can't produce a garment or two pair of items basically that are fully white. You know, there's so many meanings in already whiteness and just pureness and cleanness, which comes back to the idea of very specific identity or national identity, which is clean and which is preserved very nicely without other cultures being touched. You know, so it's already there.
Yeah, pureness somehow. Yes, right. In this context. In this context, they of course obviously gain a certain kind of view and interpretation. That's true. But then if you juxtapose it with Ragnar Picas's work, I think that I don't even see white there. I think it's kind of a different shade. It's more. Sorry. She said something, I couldn't hear it, but anyway, so that's really white, but that's not white anymore, it's becoming something else. And then the body is not there.
Margit Lõhm, who's one of the writers, nicely wrote that if Taainia's white is actually not Estonian white, this is like some foreign, weird, alien white, then Ragnar's white is like Estonian white, so it's nice that she actually connected this back to you and still to the Estonian white.
That's really interesting. What do you mean Estonian whiteness?
I think it's more, she meant it like in a way like more warm and more welcoming, and somehow you know that it invites you to be like you, if you're somewhere not home, then you want to be home. You have this nostalgic idea about home being safe and warm and somehow keeps you nicely. I think she means that. But again, I can't tell.
Okay.
It was my word. I just remember this idea.
Maybe a little bit another topic. You mentioned briefly genders, and yesterday you were speaking about the students and how they are like always making non-gender clothing, and it's something becoming more and more popular, I would say, also in fashion world. And department stores are opening like the whole floors for like mixed clothing, not like men's department and women's. But here at this exhibition we see actually quite a lot of gendered clothing. Also that when choosing the models, the artists said us like if they want boys or girls to model, and well, they had like quite specific ideas. I don't know, maybe you could comment on this trend or like this new ideas of not making gendered clothing and
Yes, it's true. It's the question of gender is obviously very internal to the whole field of fashion, and I don't know if fashion in the modern sense would even exist, or the fashion industries would even exist if there weren't a division, gender division, because it makes so much more profitable to sell gendered garments than non-gendered garments. So I guess to talk about non-gendered garments is one way of opposing the kind of economic model of fashion, which is based on dichotomy of genders. At the same time, it's of course commentary on the kind of gender system that we live in the society, I guess, and I'm trying to make a commentary on that through the artistic practice, through your design practice. So there are many, on many levels, I think it is, and students, my students, who I think majority of them just design garments who are not meant for women or men. They always say that to me. It's important for them to kind of find their own place. It's kind of when you are a student and you're a young student and you're a design student and you design, of course you're kind of also thinking about your own position in the world and your own identity, so it's part of that work as well, I guess. But of course, I don't know, it's a matter that I think we really need to think about. I don't know if non-gendered is kind of the answer, but the final answer, but it's some sort of a viewpoint to the issue of why do we live in a world that is so strictly gendered, and what that actually means and how it restricts our way of thinking and living our lives in society.
I remember when I first met you in Helsinki last summer, there was you organized a fashion seminar which brought up some similar topics what we talk today. It briefly at the end touched also the topic of nationalism and fashion. But I remember that because you're also a curator and you also curate fashion, and I remember I saw this exhibition in Jaama, which also actually dealt with, I think, not nationalism in a sense that I do here, but it was like a Finnish, I can't remember how it was written or described, but maybe you can also comment on that, because I remember that you also curate actually fashion. I know it was Aalto students, I remember.
Yes, it was kind of a short exhibition, one-day thing I did for the Kiasma Contemporary Museum of Art, combined an installation of garments from our students' BA and MA collections, and then a seminar that discussed the garments and issues around them. So, and identity was kind of the central theme. Gender identity, sexual identity, ethnic identity, and then we tried to touch upon the national identity, but the scholars that I had invited were kind of really reluctant to talk about it. So I think I tried to have them talk about it, but somehow, I don't know, it's a touchy topic somehow, I guess. And it's good that you dedicate a whole exhibition to it, I think. Because I think these issues should be talked about more. So obviously I think, if I think about, for example, our lot of students who come from all over the world, especially on the MA level, some of them come from Estonia, some of them come from the States or Mexico, Colombia, we have China, we have so many different nationalities that come together. And then, of course, when you start working with the students, you notice some differences there. In the way that they think, in the way that they see. So of course, the kind of the culture in which they have been brought up and educated is something that they carry with them. But I don't know if you can just say that it's about nationality. I think it's something much more complex than that. But there are differences also in the way that they design and what they design, what they find kind of important. It's very hard to say because you can't see the words here.
Yes, because when we just before spoke about Ragna's work being like good ending point to this exhibition, being like an answer to Tanya maybe. At the same time, we see a lot of elements in Ragna's work which are also very there in the national costumes, I would say. It's highly focused on handcraft and handwork, and this methodological kind of focus on like work ethics and how to produce it. And we say it's like quite anonymous, but at the same time, if we think about Ragna, and we still want to like market her as Estonian, so there's always still like this. We just somehow like got out, but we still bring it back to like a nation.
It's true. A couple of things that I think are worth mentioning. Maybe I think that it's very interesting to think about kind of the nationality and then high fashion. Because high fashion obviously is a practice in which the work is done meticulously by hand, by individual work, and really like crafted in a way that mass-produced garments certainly are not. So there is kind of the touch of the hand and the working with your hands, and for a long period of time. So it takes a lot of time and energy to produce something that is considered high fashion to begin with. And at the same time, if you think about the kind of the national costumes, which fall outside the idea of fashion, conceptually, they're also crafted by hand. It takes a lot of time and energy to make a national costume, and you don't do it, you don't mass produce them, they are always kind of individuals. So there is a kind of a similarity there, which in terms of labor and the kind of work methods as well. So they somehow come together in an interesting way, or there's linkage between them. And then at the same time, you mentioned about you like to think about her as Estonian fashion designer, and that's a kind of it's a question on a totally different level. Something that doesn't really have to do, I don't know, it's just a branding method. Estonians want to maybe brand themselves as a fashion nation, something that is new to this millennium, that or since, I don't know, the Antwerp school, I think, in the late 1990s and early 2000s, and establishing of the Modern Museum in Antwerp, and how kind of the idea of fashion being some nation's core has been something that other nations then have picked up on, and Scandinavian countries like Denmark and Sweden and Norway also have kind of started to see themselves through fashion as important fashion nations. And I think that basically Helsinki, but anyway, Finland has picked up on that as well into 2010s. We have long been a design nation, obviously, because of Alvar Aalto and all our other modernist designers, male designers mainly, but now we are kind of also trying to talk about ourselves through fashion. So, but that's a completely different discourse, and it happens on a totally different level. It's something that people from the politics and policy makers like to think about when they try to separate themselves from other countries. So it's a totally different way of thinking about nationality.
Yeah, I completely agree that it is, and I think it's nice actually way to show how some other way national identity is being constructed by not maybe by the artist herself, but maybe some other institutions or some other forms of like some other actors, as you brought in, for example, politicians. It's also, you know, political identity construction, which is a huge part of like national, not national, yeah, but basically nation, which like core element of that. So again, I think it's like maybe nice angles to brought out with inside this exhibition anyway. But maybe I want to also ask, because a few nights ago we had like a round of discussion about art writing, and I don't want to, as we spoke before, I don't want to call the writers who write about this exhibition art critics, because at least in my opinion, none of them are actually only art critic. But maybe you also explain about how do you wrote about those works, and how did you get started? And, because I know your texts are very like specific. They take work and put it in some very basically 20th century culture, philosophical, you know, thought, and then explain how it reflects that thought, which is interesting. I think we had like 3 authors who did similar things from different disciplines, basically sociology or anthropology, and you know, maybe you just briefly explain your writing methods.
Well, it was difficult. It was very different from what I've kind of, how I've usually worked if I've been writing to an exhibition. So, and it was difficult because of the format of the exhibition. And we were kind of, or I was given free range of whatever I would like to write, and I think that I did kind of, I didn't really write about the works themselves, but of course it was not even possible because some of the works I didn't necessarily even see in the way that they are now. But I saw something and I was inspired by them. I kind of tried to make a dialogue, and maybe I tried to do kind of just a fashion context around the pieces, which is a bit different than writing analytically about the works themselves. So it's kind of circling around them and what kind of discourses they fall into if you think about them from the perspective of fashion and fashion history and fashion theory. So that's how I wrote. Maybe.
Yeah, is there someone who would like to ask questions from us? Me, Karin, Annamari?
Or just comment?
Yeah, exactly, just comments on any, because there were so many thoughts and topics which are sometimes contradictory, sometimes too difficult to discuss in this, I don't know how many minutes we have been.
Yeah.
Because
it would be really nice to hear your comments on the theme or the pieces or the exhibition.
Of course, yeah. And I know that we basically every night we go through sometimes similar topics again and again with new people. So for me, I've been here every day, you know, and I think it's very interesting to hear very different angles and very different like people from different academic backgrounds and writers and just from public. So it's really interesting. I really wish you to take part of this kind of questions or comments.
Thank you for this lovely discussion. I actually want to touch upon something you said about whether this H&M and Zara type of clothing can be put under the label of fashion or whether it's mass production. But I was thinking about how this, very often say that the high fashion obviously influences that level, that you see something that Christian Dior or someone does in Paris, and then in a few months it's in H&M. I was just wondering how this kind of system works. And I mean, obviously they are the magic fashion designers who obviously designed for H&M such that how this kind of relationship works.
It's a really good question. So of course, many of the brands, even H&M and Zara, they do have sort of high fashion catwalk pieces that are not really sold in the shops at all necessarily, but they are just for showing and creating value around the other garments. And this is the case with many brands, obviously. So there are kind of these different levels. There is the high fashion, and then there is the pret-à-porter or the ready-made garments, and they have a different function. So it's built in the kind of the ways in which the companies work. But my point was, but then of course it could also be taking influence from other designers' work, copying, stealing, you name it. So that's also inbuilt in the system, copying, stealing, and using other people's work, and especially these mass brands that sell inexpensive clothing are genius in that. So they kind of steal and take other people's ideas for which other people have worked quite hard, and they just use it for their own ends. I'm sorry to say, but I don't consider that fashion at all. I think that's stealing, and I don't think that we should be part of that. And I strongly feel that that kind of designing should definitely not be called as fashion. And I don't know why we do that. And it doesn't really have to do with fashion. It has to do with economics. It has to do with capitalism. It has to do with brands who are not really interested in fashion at all. They are interested in making profit. And so I think that we should really undo that whole system and start refusing to call that fashion. I think fast fashion is just an awful word. Fashion is never fast. It changes, but it doesn't have to change fast. It's about thinking, and thinking is slow.
Yeah. I just wanted to comment on this. Yesterday we had the philosophers' discussion, and I think at one point the question was like, why is fashion there at all, or something, and could there be like no fashion? Like with this, I was reminded that I remembered that during the early Soviet Union, like after the revolution in early 1920s, there was this idea of killing fashion, or because fashion was considered something really bourgeoisie, and then there was like different experiments with this, and there was also some really experimental designs worked out to make like really affordable, mass-produced clothing for the workers, but it never actually worked out because the state was so poor, and like people just were wearing whatever they could, and those kind of experimental stuff didn't go in production. But maybe now with fast fashion, or like this, what they say, fast fashion or mass production, and really affordable H&M clothes, maybe this idea of killing fashion has now like come to true.
Well, certainly in 2015, when this trend forecaster Lee Edelcourt wrote this manifesto anti-fashion, and she argued that fashion is actually dead. So I think that fashion people and researchers ever since have been talking about the end of fashion and whether it has ended and what is coming next. But at the same time, if you think about it historically, these negative attitudes toward fashion are not anything new. They are just the content of the negativity has changed, and now it has to do with the systems of production that don't really value garments, labor, the people who make the garments, or natural resources. So it's kind of this. It has to do with this. These questions and real problems, and that is why many people think that fashion is dead. But I would say that fashion is not dead. It's just that just this system should be dead, that is very careless, working in a really careless manner. That is something that should be dead. Fashion is not dead. I think fashion lives on.
I think we also should differentiate between. Right now, it sounds like we talk about mass production as something bad. You know, I think it's not that it's not that simple. In a sense that if I thought about the mass production as being something bad, it reminds me of this 20th century kind of talks in culture field that, you know, everything you mass produce mechanically, this is like, you know, fall of culture. So I think we talk about like ethics and ideologies rather than like the very production of mass production itself. So I think mass production actually can be not like in general bad.
I don't know, I think, did you read the IPCC report the week before the International Panel for Climate Change? Their report and what they say about our world and where it is going. So I think that the ways in which we produce nowadays almost anything from food to fashion is going to die. And we should really take this seriously. I'm not kidding at all. I think that we need to really rethink our ways of being and doing in this world, and this type of mass production that we live with is really deadly. You know, in 2013, over 1,000 people were killed in a Rana Plaza, this clothing factory collapse in Bangladesh, and it's only one of the examples that have really killed thousands of people recently. And I mean, to just think about the really toxic ways of clothing production. So I can't say that mass production is anything good. And we should just start thinking about it in a different way. That's what we need to do.
I remember just like a couple of editions back in Estonia, we have this culture monthly event. And there was like a raised question about should we start to be better as individuals or as a huge basically companies as well. You know? So I remember at the same time I met you in Helsinki, I went to see other seminars in other places. I can't remember what it was called, fashion seminar.
Oh yes,
Yes.
Art University Fashion Seminar. Yeah.
Yes, so yeah, exactly. And there was also invited Sara's, the brand Sara, leading person who is responsible for the ecological kind of lines. And you know, actually, I think it's a very difficult question. Should we start as individuals or should we start as like huge companies as Sara, as H&M, who actually will make influence? So in that sense, you know, I think I believe actually that these kind of companies, even though they just run like 3% of the world clothing production, still they have maybe more influence than we as small brands and small like designers can do.
Yeah, this question of scale is very important, of course. So, of course, individuals can make some choices, but I think it needs to be on a very much bigger scale. So everybody, all the, you know, from the politicians, state politicians, to companies, they should be thinking about these issues and, in a way, also kind of not tied to, I mean, everybody globally. So the scale is important here, it's true.
And also I remember from the same talk about this faking of the other brands and high fashion. It was actually quite nice to hear that, you know, for example, Sara, I don't know how many people work there worldwide, like I randomly say 20,000, you know, and they have, let's say, I don't know, 500 designers and 5,000 assistants for designers who actually offer, you know, a lot of ways what to do. And of course, quite often it happens that you can't filter out like a picture which doesn't have copyrights, for example. So, you know, quite often it's the scale which, again, you can't filter, and this happens, and, you know, it takes down the brand's name. I'm not fighting for them, I just try to give like counter arguments also for the other side.
Yes, you can do that. But how do you feel about the exhibition, if I may ask you a question? How do you think you succeeded with it?
very difficult question. I have to think what was my initial where did I want to end up with. I think I can't make this conclusion yet because this exhibition runs only for 9 days altogether. Tomorrow is the last day. I think a lot of the things we have written here, we have produced and we have saved to the video and audio, which will be then put online. I think this has afterlife after this exhibition, because I think Artishok format is very short, very intense, and very overwhelming. So in that sense, I think I need to have some time also to see the reflections, and if I could make people to think about maybe identity or belonging in different perspectives. I definitely, I think, succeeded in inviting different artists, authors, and bringing in so many voices. So really, the amount of text you see around also in this building, there's 72 different voices about similar topics. So there's so many different views how to see something, nation, belonging, fashion. So in that sense, I definitely succeeded. But I think there's still more to go in that sense. So I can't give you complete answer. Does anyone else have any questions? If not, then thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe I would just, I told it already in the introduction as well. Tomorrow there is still 1 day to go. There is Artishok catalog presentation and also a fashion demonstration where you actually can see all those clothing and artworks in fashion demonstration.
And also an announcement that Laivi, the participating artist, is having tonight a performance at the Ares building on Pärnumaalt 154. So at 9 o'clock. Yeah, so let's go there.
Which is actually a presentation of her new collection, so highly suggested to go there.
Yes.
You can take a train straight from here and go. It's easy. Thank you.